Alrighty, good evening, and I jumped right to the page I didn't want to start at, but here we are. Welcome to NycosRPG. I'm Jonathan Alvin, your host, and tonight we are going to talk about the age-old competition between the familiar and the adventure. The biggest challenge in role-playing games is to keep your players actively engaged in what the story is. And in the case of the game masters who choose to not host a story, but rather to host a sandbox, this may not be as much of a difficulty as you might think, but it also does create a bit of a conflict because on the one hand, a group that stays in a central location is arguably easier to manage, able to keep the logistics going easier and such. But the players can, from time to time, become frustrated with the repetitive nature of adventures week over week in a similar location. Obviously, the villains and the monsters you might work out meeting are going to become isolated and limited when you're running an adventure that week over week is in the same locale, unless there's some driver that's pushing the story beyond that. And of course, the sandbox game masters would prefer not to have any drivers of that sort. So this challenge, therefore, between the two ends of the spectrum become somewhat competitive. And we don't want to dwell too much on the variances, but I do want to talk about each of them in their own right and discuss what their benefits are to the game master and to the players. But before we get to that, I do want to do my expected press for you to become a member of our community. If you haven't yet subscribed to the Twitch, that way you can see the episodes commercial free all the way through. And as those commercials get aired on YouTube, if you have not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel at NycosRPG, please do so, because that helps to keep this a daily channel and lets everyone know when those new episodes become publicized when you subscribe and click on the button. I don't want to go too much into it, but just realize that Nykos is a 12,000-year tale, 50 years in the making. I've been a game master nonstop for 50 years and have dealt with an average of one session per week for that entire period. And during the era of COVID, I was running between 8 and 10 events per week, all in the same world at the same time, and even having crossover episodes. So they're not operating in your clumsy old system. Nykos is different, and the difference is fun. All right, we'll get onto this in a minute. So when we talk about the different styles of play, they impact the world that you are developing as a game master. If you are creating a centralized location from whence the players make all of their actions, then you are establishing not only a routine in terms of what they are fundamentally able to engage with, but you're also setting up a limitation to the types of encounters they will have, the types of monsters they're going to engage with. If your story has a travelogue vibe, if the story is carrying from episode location to episode location to episode location, that won't be the problem, but there is a whole host of other problems that develop for you going forward, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of those two positions as we look to the future in both games. So we're going to start with reverse of what I was saying. We're going to start with the travelogue series, and these are those stories that are carrying the adventuring party from one locale to another. Now, this can be done in a myriad of ways. The most obvious and arguably the least favored is a direct railroad mechanism where each story is a different stop on the train, so to speak, and the players must engage with all of the encounter pieces before they can move on to the next set piece, and it just rotates them. Now, the advantage to such a system is actually quite extensive. First of all, there are exciting new locations, and from a game master's standpoint, it's wonderful to be able to describe your locales, talk about the climate, the environment, the atmosphere, the nuances, the types of creatures that are in the local vicinity, the kinds of hobbies and natural habitat and community involvement, and these all are extremely extensive in terms of taking a lot of narration time. They tend to be detailed, and if they aren't, if your game master is moving you from location to location but not amplifying the locale, they're doing you a disservice, and you're not getting the game that you should be from them, because the very advantage of this movement from location to location isn't necessarily a check mark the box for the types of creatures you might meet, even though it may cause there to be a wider array of encounters. It really isn't intended to be simply a vehicle for the monster a week hobby, and while it can be that, that functionally creates logistics nightmares. If you're looking at what the players have as belongings, whenever there is a shift in locale, there's a chance of that information, those materials becoming used up, being destroyed, being waylaid, stolen, and the like. And so therefore you're fundamentally begging your adventuring group to enter a situation of logistics nightmares, where they are having to deal with, gosh, what will happen if I lose my equipment, or what if the arrows don't arrive, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, some of these are supply side issues and can be rectified simply by making sure that your vendors in game are appropriately stocked. But the real issue is that the lack of the allies and or resources will put the players put them on their back feet and make them have to struggle more difficultly to hold on to the story. And every time you give them a knock at the story, you undermine your own creativity and undermine your ability to convey the story elements to them. So let's talk about the other alternative, which is the familiar scenes. If you are playing an adventure group and you have them starting from a home location and you're providing them needed support and enthusiastic assistance from the local community, then you're going to have shorter narration over time. Certainly the first time you describe them will be just like any other, but after that, then you'll be able to say, okay, we're going over by the barn, or we're going south to the border fences, or perhaps we are moving into town, in which case you are giving recognized locations. Once the players have become familiar with the very locale that they are in, then they no longer have to have you constantly reminding them what is where. And as a matter of fact, they may start providing feedback to you about how they are interacting with that social landscape. That means that we can move quicker to portions of the game that are dialogue. In other words, you can say, I'm walking into the barber shop and I want to talk to the fireman who surprisingly just walked in. And by making this dialogue easier, you're also providing a means for the NEPs to become easier to comprehend. They're going to become more recognizable because they're going to be seen more than one time. They're going to become the local bartender or the local hairdresser. And when they become affiliated or equated with the community, and the players become familiar with the NEPs, now the dialogues can be more precise. We can have some fun with the social interaction. Also, by giving routine descriptions and physical locations, you provide the opportunity for the scenes to actually become easier to comprehend. If you describe the parties being assaulted on their way to prayers at the local church by the local hoodlums, and that occurs just outside the vestibule of the church community, the faith community, now you've got a real understanding of what's going on, who's where. And this means you can do easier transitions either to a feature scene or away from it into a solo roleplay environment. And this ability to move back and forth between them is itself an advantage. Now, the final, if you will, nail in the coffin, if you will, of the comparatives between the travelogue and this familiarized campaign is that you have less logistic issues. If they're looking for someone to sell them a pair of shoes, they know who the cobbler is in town. The familiarity, while it does, according to theory, breed contempt, familiarity also offers opportunities. And this ability to negotiate within the framework clearly makes the familiar campaign the no-brain improvement over the travelogue. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the travelogue adventures. As a matter of fact, nearly all the campaigns I've ever run end up being a travel vignette as they move from location to location to location, searching out the particular clues, becoming familiar with the local area, expanding their knowledge until they become fundamentally an instrument of the community, and then they elevate beyond that to the next tier of the adventure, that next level of excitement and thrills. And because the travelogue is so useful, why don't you consider this option? And that is to make the adventuring mechanism one that is familiar. For example, perhaps they're traveling by trade caravan, in which case then every morning and every evening they're still meeting with the same individuals who are part of the caravan. They're dealing with the drama of what might have transpired in the previous day from a narrative standpoint so that they can reestablish the communication that's been missing. And yet at this time, therefore, the more dialogue-driven, or rather monologue-driven narrative process can be replaced because the community itself is fluid and yet also familiar. So that's one way to adjust it so that you're getting a more equitable feed between them. Conversely, or not conversely, but in addition, you might consider instead doing a flip-flop between familiar missions where they do something in their local area and then they go on an adventure that takes them beyond that into the wilderness. They discover many things and then eventually find their way back home. In this kind of a way, you can therefore take the advantages of the familiar and superimpose them on the travelogue and get the best of both worlds. My question to you is, which of those do you prefer? Which way do you tell the story? I'd love to hear your comments, and of course we can start a great conversation in the comment section about this. In the meantime, if you haven't yet, make sure that you check out our Patreon program. If you are interested at all in the NycosRPG, feel free to go to NycosRPG.com and download the Master Book Quick Play Guide. That mechanism allows you to start to play with the way NycosRPG works so you can see how it might work for the adventures and games that you play. And in the near future, the Master Book will be available. So if you're interested in pre-ordering, also send us a text message or reach out to us via NycosRPG.com and we will coordinate with you to provide you in a pre-release copy. Now, for clarity, the pre-release copies of the books are fundamentally without any artwork yet. We are working on developing at least the internal feel of the books, having a couple of marketing managers and graphics artists take a look at it, but we're not to that point yet. So right now, the materials that are available are in the pre-release form, and there'll be more information on that at NycosRPG.com. I want to thank you for being here tonight and hope to see you at the next episode. I'm Jonathan Albin. This has been The World in Around 80 Days from NycosRPG. We'll see you next time.